Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, the Consumer Behavior Transformation in Financial Services. I am Juan Hoyos, Chief Commercial Officer at Cinq Technologies, and I'm going to be your host on this session. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We have an exciting agenda ahead of us with special participation of our distinguished guests. We have Luana Bichuetti, Vice President of Auto Business Unit at Creditas. We also have the pleasure of having Matheus Moura, Executive Marketing Manager at Serasa Experian, and Trocmé, Founder and Managing Director of EDIC Consulting. I have the pleasure to introduce them in a little while as well. I see some more people. For those of you just joining us, welcome. We'll start in a minute our fascinating session, the Consumer Behavior Transformation in Financial Services. We'll get to discuss how consumer behavior evolution and digital transformation is dramatically changing this sector. So before we start, some general information. During the session, I'd like to invite you to participate, sending your questions through the tool. Q&A will be covered at the end of this session. And don't worry, we'll be using Slido, which allows you to submit your question anonymously. So don't be shy, send your question and we'll get that moving. Also, a recorded version of this webinar is in place and will be available for you after this session through the YouTube channel. All right. Okay, so with no further delays, I'd like to turn over and give the stage to our guest for a brief introduction. Without particular order, Luana, welcome. And could you give us just a brief introduction of yourself?
Thanks, will do. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Luana Bichuetti. Like Juan mentioned, I'm the VP of Auto at Creditas. Creditas is I would say, the largest digital secured platform, secured lending platform in Brazil. We started that way. We're evolving towards an ecosystem, but we're based in Brazil. We have operations now in Mexico as well. And I've been with the company for about 2 years. Before that, did a bit of venture capital, worked in the beer industry with AB InBev, a lot of management consulting, and a lot of my, I would say, adult working time living in the US as well. So a pleasure to be here with everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Luana. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time. Matheus, welcome. A few words about yourself.
Thank you, Juan. Hi, guys. My name is Matheus Moura. I'm from Brazil. I'm living in São Paulo, and I work as an executive marketing manager in Serasa. Serasa is a fintech that belongs to Experian. Experian is a multinational company responsible for dealing with a lot of data. And in Brazil, we have a fintech that is Serasa, that is a unity business focused on helping Brazilians get credit. So we developed an ecosystem that help people in all stages of getting credit. So consult your data, consult your credit score, negotiate your debit. We have a digital wallet. We also have a subscription product that helps you avoid fraud. And we also have a credit marketplace. So we have a whole ecosystem to fulfill the credit journey of Brazilian. And I've been working this project for 5 years. So since they started.
That's great, Matheus. Thanks for that. I'd love to hear more about that perspective. You have a lot to say here. And James, again, welcome back and thanks for joining us. Any a brief introduction now for this group?
Yes, so I'm an ex-city banker, ex-Diebold, and as I said earlier, I'm a technologist who's also a technophobe and a banker who's a technophile, and I try to reconcile those two aspects of my multiple personality disorder.
Thanks for joining. Okay, everyone, fantastic. Thank you for that. Well, so to get started, changes in consumer behavior has been accelerating, as I said, during the last decade or so, right? Self-service, chatbots, online tools, including virtual assistants, wearable robots, and all over the place. And all of this has been dictating important transition in different industries, right? We all know that, especially in the financial industry too. And on top of that, we know that the pandemic in 2020 forced most of us to fully adopt digital solutions, driving most of the sector to accelerate their digital transformation initiatives. So let me just start, provoking some questions. And as I said, no particular order. I want to ask one question, starting with Luana. Luana, let's start from the beginning, right? Previously to the pandemic, what is your perspective in terms of the financial services digital challenges through the years until 2020? What's happening? What service what issues, service, and you were facing in your company?
So, for everybody here, the Brazilian reality may be a little different than the US as well, right? But I want to say, obviously, there is a process of, on the consumer side, a lot of digital education happening. So the more you have that, the more people actually start accessing the digital products. I think at first, there is a more digital use of more transactional activities, right? But then there's an evolution towards using digital platforms that before maybe you required or you wanted to talk to someone, and that has a trust component. And so the challenge is, how do you sort of transpose that trust component to a digital platform? I think that was the evolution. And obviously from a company perspective, there's a big layer of fraud, right? So the more you create digital platforms, you're far from the consumer sort of physically. So you have to have intelligence on that side, but a lot of learnings there. But I would say these are the biggest ones on both sides.
Yeah, and you mentioned, cybersecurity is kind of being one of the things during the last couple of years. Matheus, your perspective, what can you tell us about that? What's going on before the pandemic?
I think before the pandemic, we were facing a challenge of changing habits, because when you consider that the most activity people who were using financial service were not 100% digital native, they were used to do something with the banks. They used to go to the bank. They used to have this kind of process of getting financial service. And then the breaking this barrier of fears was very difficult, because I have to trust in the another company, as Luana said. So I think the most challenging was changing this habit. And then the pandemic came, and they have to do digital. So I think there's just a lot of things going on, because people need to break this fear barrier that we had,
right,
and use things digital first.
So
but for me, it's breaking the habits.
Right, they were forced to make all the changes. That's awesome. Yeah, James, I know that you're a consultant on this. I mean, I love to hear your perspective before pandemic, and I know there's a lot there, but come on, let me know.
No. Before the pandemic, I think definitely we had a trend already of adoption in terms of digitization, and I look at things globally. So Brazil is actually not all that different compared to the United States in terms of some of the expectations that consumers have in the digital experience with their financial institution, actually. But I look at it in other areas, because we talked a little bit earlier about IoT and connected devices, and I think that comes into play. Issues such as things that people take for granted. You drive in a car with your GPS giving you instructions while having a conversation on WhatsApp, and today nobody thinks anything of it. It's normal. And so when it comes to financial services, when it comes to trust, all of a sudden now there's a boundary, because you're talking about personal data, personal information. And I think there's a learning curve there. I think that consumers have now started to develop a healthy sense of paranoia. And you were talking, Matheus, earlier about credit check and fraud, and so was Luana. All of this is top of mind, and we see that happening in Europe. The difference between a European bank and an American bank for the same operation. An American bank allows you to deposit a check with your mobile phone, and that's it. The image is processed, and the image of the check acts as a legal substitute for the paper document. Right. Well, at French banks, you can do the same thing, but you still have to mail the check back to the bank that keeps the paper on file. So it kind of defeats the purpose. But so here, the frustration is on the consumer side as opposed to the bank side, because the consumer says, what's the purpose of me doing a deposit with a check if I have to mail it to you?
Right.
So I see what I called earlier a revolution of rising expectations, and people just want to get in and out of a store, of a bank, or whatever.
Right.
They want the convenience to pay with a mobile device, whether it's a wearable device or a phone.
Right.
And they want it to be as seamless as possible. And the infrastructure to make that happen in a safe, trusted environment, that's the challenge we all face today.
Well, with the pandemic, it's probably, I see hard to people to get and start mailing checks and all of that. But, leaning towards that, as I said before, we didn't derail. We just moved to a different track, which is way faster. So how do you see during the last 12, 18 months, what really accelerated, in your point of view? What was the area in digital transformation that really accelerated?
Mobile was the biggest switch, whether it was for banking, retail shopping, food delivery services, grocery delivery services, or curbside pickup.
Right.
You saw an explosion of adoption. The apps already existed, the services already existed, but the adoption just exploded.
Luana, in your area, do you think it was the same thing? It was in a mobile side, or what do you think?
I haven't gone to a restaurant in 18 months. I order from my favorite restaurants with Uber Eats.
Right. Yeah, it happens to all of us. Yeah.
So and a lot of people do the same thing. So behavior has changed, but because of the pandemic, not because people want to do different things. They want to do the exact same things they used to do, but they have to do them differently.
They were forced to move. Now, let me turn this to Luana. I was asking, so how do you see this on your side?
I want to say, obviously, we're all talking about acceleration of digital process, but the underlying reason why that happened is that people were, and this will sound nuanced, but it's important, people broke away from limiting beliefs, right? And means, at least for my industry, for example, is, well, I can't trust a company and go get a loan where my car will be put as a collateral unless I'm there and I see it, that they're not trying to fool me or get my car, right? So what happened is when the pandemic came, you were forced to break away from the belief that you can't trust a digital platform to do so. And I think you go through these in other platforms like, well, I have to be at the grocery store in order to choose my vegetables. No, you really don't, So I think the underlying reason was important. And for us, this was translating into people being forced to actually trust us and finding a way to dialogue with us. And not necessarily just getting a loan without talking to anyone. We learned that, right? Digital is not about automating. You have to still be human in certain areas. And in our area, that is certainly true. Yeah,
absolutely true. And also we need to consider there's, certain, ages that people are still need to and wants to relate with somebody. Matheus, how do you see in your area? What happened during the last 12, 18 months was different?
Was the same. The digitalization, of course, was very exploding in Brazil. So there's a lot of people who need to do things, to do digital things first. And I think the challenge is, imagine that you are in a regular day, you were dealing with people who already was digital. And then a lot of people who never try to do this digital first, now is trying to do. So you have to invest a lot in UX and UI to make this very easy for them. And they needed to have a good experience, because if they don't, they will not come back, but they need to. And then if you don't do it, your competition will do it. So for us, I think the challenge was, how can we invest in UX and UI, because there's a lot of people who will do this for the first time. And how can we capture this audience, and then they will become a client that will return.
And you brought a very interesting point, which is, if you don't do it, the competition would do it. So it's not about only we accelerating, everybody is accelerating. So how do we keep the pace ahead of the others? So this is a great thing. I want to ask another question. So to the audience, remember that we have here the post you can see in the chat. If you want to post any question, please feel free to ask these phenomenal panelists, and then we can continue our discussions. Matheus, getting back to you, how does your the financial institution work to understand customer behaviors, right? We're talking about bad customer behaviors and all of that. If there's any strategic planning or market intelligence process in order to address that, because what I'm saying here is just what we felt as users or consumers, but in your area, in your industry or your company, has anything changed in terms of having a intelligence department trying to address, how customer behaviors are and how to adapt into that?
Yeah, we have two pillars that we work with. That is social listening, that people are talking about their lives in social and how they're dealing with the pandemic and their fears and using our social media as a way to talk with us, that I'm not able to do that, help me, how can I do this, because it's the first time that I'm doing. So we have this pillar, and another pillar was we built a team of to take care of our data lake. That is, how can we capture all the data that we are getting now, and organize this and use this to help another areas to improve our product. Because the problem of data lake team is that everybody expect that there's a nerd guy over there that will deliver you a report and it will solve your life. No, you need to make everybody use the data that you're collecting. So you have a team that it's organizing this data, and then you need to, okay, guys, everybody, we have the data. How can we use this to improve your usability? How can you improve this to improve your product? How can you use this to improve your marketing strategy? So yes, we have these two pillars, that is social listening, to understand how they are feeling, especially, and the data lake, that is statistic, that help us improve our products and strategy.
Yeah. Social is really one of the key elements, especially to get engagement. How do we understand? This is part of digital marketing. So one in Creditas,
the compliment is in social media, you get how they feel.
Right.
And with the data team, you get statistics. What is hurting the most.
Correct. Well, this is great. I think most of the companies are trying to follow something on that sense. Luana, in your company, or can you tell us about how you're addressing that and how to understand customer behaviors or changes, to make sure that you are on pace of the transformation too?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, before we get into any data, we spend a lot of time thinking about what the questions that we want to solve are, right? That we want to ask, what is it that we want to learn? But then data, just getting the data and going into the data with it's not just about getting what we have and then slicing them, but also make sure we have the right, events mapped in every single interaction in our product, because the consumer behavior in the product tells a story as well, right? And then every time we're seeing that behavior change, we have a way of trying to capture the why of the customer, whether they remained on the product or whether they left. We try to capture the whys. Research is always good, but more often than not, we find that when we ask a question during research, the customer sort of will answer something that may not be a reflection of the reality. So you have to be careful with that. And then finally, what we do a lot is piloting. We try to see what's happening, changes in behavior, and everybody's encouraged to pilot all the time. If all the pilots are working, is because we're not piloting enough, right? So there is a lot of approach to piloting and learning and then refeeding that. And then the last thing I will say is we have a tendency, I think every human being, of the recency bias, right? So we think about the latest things as the ones that are more the absolute true. Given that reality change post-pandemic, maybe you piloted something a year and a half ago that got you a result. And then more often than not, some people will say, well, we've piloted that before. And then here we'll say, well, do it again because reality changed. So don't expect the same results. So I think this is what we've been doing.
That's fantastic. I mean, we're thinking and trying to test some hypotheses that they probably were not true in the past, not necessarily they are the same right now. So this is a great way of seeing it. In Cinq, we have a powerful asset to help understand. We have more than a dozen of examples of financial institutions that we draft our customer consumption profiles, and then we run data and analytics with data intelligence and all of that. And most of that, we try to use, technologies like AI just to try to make, sense of the information. It's not about having a lot of data lake or a lot of information if we don't know how to merge them. So James, to that point, I think we had this conversation a couple of months ago, right? How do you see that trend on your side? I mean, how do we capture where the consumer is moving towards so we can make the adaptations to it?
So we look at it from a consumer perspective, but we also look at it from our client's perspective and try to reconcile the two, because we often find a disconnect. And so we don't get paid by the consumers, we get paid by our clients. And sometimes the conversation can be a little difficult because they have a perception of who their consumers are that can be jaded simply because they're not necessarily focused on every aspect of the data they have available to them on their consumer base. On the other hand, you also have some limitations from a financial services industry that you don't have in other businesses with regards to data privacy and data security. So from a financial services standpoint, there can be some constraints and limitations in terms of the intelligence you can gather. So what a lot of institutions do, they will use surveys, they will use focus groups, they will try to also use syndicated research, like NPS scores from surveys from JD Power and others, et cetera. And then do the same thing you do, which is look at all of this data from multiple angles and try to interpret it into something that becomes actionable intelligence. And then from the other side is also take a look at what your competitors are doing and how are they interacting with their consumers? What products, what services are they offering that can give you clues? Because if they are in your geography, if they are in your same market niche, odds are they overlap with your own consumer base. And you may actually have customers who have an account at the other financial institution. So doing a little bit more digging and through surveys can be helpful.
Right. So that's, again, it's the same discussion, and I think again it's very interesting and fascinating to understand the behavior itself, right? Because we're speaking about the behavior changes in the financial industry. However, the consumer, and we will have this discussion, right? And I want to know your opinion on this. Consumer compares you not necessarily only towards financial institutions, right? We're talking about Citibank. And then all of a sudden, they say, okay, let me see what Bank of America is doing. They're probably going to compare with Apple. They're going to compare with Amazon, and say, well, listen, it's just one click. Why can I do that on Citibank? I don't like Citibank anymore. So, kind of, how do you deal with that challenge of consumer comparing you with different sectors that is so complex, that doesn't need all the regulatory needs? They then need maybe all this cybersecurity, privacy, and all the other things. So how do you see the industry moving along that to make sure that the consumer feels, great or good with the solutions that are being provided to them?
That question for me?
Yeah, it's a question for you. How do you feel that the consumer, the industry is looking at that in order to surpass that challenge?
I think you're right. It's what I refer to as a revolution of rising expectation, because the way things work in one particular aspect, whether you're doing travel or entertainment or whatever other services you may be accessing through those apps, and then you come to the bank thing and it's a little clumsier, and you have multi-factor authentication that comes in. And then there's the concern that financial institutions have. That's a very legitimate concern, and one that is starting to be addressed by the industry and is gaining awareness among consumers, which is the application security within the application itself, but also application security in terms of coexistence with all of these other apps on the same device. That is a device that is not controlled by the bank, that is not on the bank's network, and yet has access to data that is on the bank's systems. And if that there's a rogue app from a jailbroken phone that somebody doesn't know, they downloaded thinking it was a free game, that poses a risk. So the financial services industry always has a higher threshold in terms of the security measures that it has to put into place, not only from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a consumer expectation standpoint, because the consumer doesn't care. It's the bank's problem. You didn't protect my money. And yet the consumer behavior itself can be the reason why the account was compromised, because they downloaded applications through a jailbroken phone or an unofficial app store somewhere. And bingo, there you go. So in the post-pandemic phase, this becomes a very urgent matter, because as more and more people have adopted those platforms, the fastest rising form of crime now is, it already was before, but it's increasing even faster, is cybercrime and identity theft, because through digital platforms, obviously, it's a lot easier if you have people who are careless about protecting their information and their data.
That's
Juan, can I add one thing to your question on experiences that cross-industry comparison of experiences? One thing that I think we can't forget is that I believe most of us here, I certainly was born in an area where all these devices were separate, right? I had a camera, right? I had a bank card account. I just had everything separate. And so we grew into then having all these things transformed in apps. So therefore we were comparing them against the physical reality of themselves, right? I think if you get the younger generation, they were born already with everything coming in a package. And so it is much more intuitive to believe that there is a direct comparison, right? That you are doing, because the reality is different. So we need to, because we were born out of that reality and then we grew into that reality, we have to make sure we are going back to the basics and relearning the premises of the new generation that is coming in and already living that reality, right? Because that creates different founding beliefs, and then which will create sort of different needs.
Right. There's a sweet spot that we're all trying to find, right? And we were speaking about that, how to lead with the different generations. And we're going to address one great question around ATM. I just want to hear first, Matheus, your opinion. Of course, Serasa is a bit different. It will not compare direct to banks, and it's kind of something that needs to be, unique for your side. But how do you see maybe on the usability or UX experience that challenge of clients comparing you with other kind of sectors and consumers?
I think I totally agree with the affirmative that you are not comparing more companies, we are comparing experience. So I'm not comparing your service with another bank. I'm comparing your experience with Netflix. So if it is easy using Netflix, why is it so difficult using your app? Should be easy. Make an enrollment. Should be easy. Make a deposit. Should be easy. Change my data. Should be easy. Delete my data. And if you are look to your side and say, okay, this old bank is not doing that. Okay, I'm better than that. Okay, you are better than a bank, but they're not using only a bank. They're using Uber. They're using Netflix. They're using everything. So even though Serasa doesn't have a competitor at the same level, and I always say that, but we have some competitors in our verticals, but we have competitors in experience. Yes. And that's why customers are expecting for us. This is a digital first.
This is a fantastic point. I think one of the things that you're adding is really how the experience touch all of us, right? And how we can address that situation overall in terms of making sure that we're developing the right things. One thing that I just want to make sure that let me just address this question, because John, you brought a very interesting point, because it's connected to this and how different generation works. John asked to the panel, how we see the final nail of the convenient cash and payment methods, right? In UK, the increase of limits for touch payment will be up to £100. So the ATM companies are starting to freak out, let's say in this way, right? That this is going to be damaging, because what's going to happen with population over 60 that behaves differently, right? So we still need to make sure that we, we're paying attention to those different generations on our processes. James, how do you see this happening? How do you see this changing happening?
The inevitable death of cash that I've been hearing about for 25 plus years. No, I think it really is going to depend on the evolution of payments as a whole. But I think there's still a room for the ATM, but it's going to be a different role. I think the ATM may actually become play more of a role as a branch substitute than just as a cash point, because there will be other things that you can do on ATMs that people don't normally do or regularly do today. And we hear about them, about a video conferencing account opening, doing all sorts of other things. So it's not a matter of whether the technology can handle it. The technology absolutely can handle all the connectivity, interactivity. You could even, hey, Matheus, you could watch Netflix on an ATM if you wanted to. But the question is not because you can do it, that you should do it. So what do you want to do on an ATM? And these are conversations we're having every day with financial institutions, but also with solution providers that are trying to find a way to position how the ATM really is an extension of a digital channel. It's actually the original digital channel, the first connected device on a network that allowed you to transact. It's just that physical element of it. People always think of it as just for cash, but it can do more things, including micro branch, nano branch, etc. And I think that's where the banks are looking at optimizing their square footage footprint versus the number of machines, and what's the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too hard, not too soft balance for distributing their networks in a hub and spoke with fewer flagship branches, etc. So that's what we hear about.
Yeah, it's interesting because it sounds like futuristic kind of try to find out what is going to happen in the future, right? But the fact is that we have different things happening in different regions, and we haven't even started talking about Bitcoin or even things like that, because that will be kind of moving too far away. But Luana, you brought a very interesting point, which is thinking broadly, right, in terms of how do we address experience, right? It's not about comparing banks, and I love that, because one of the things that we do a lot when we act helping companies on digital transformation is try to help them in innovation. And one of the biggest concepts in innovation is bringing concepts that are out of the box, right? You're bringing things from different industries, right? How can you tap into different things to your industry and then create something new that not necessarily just an improvement for what you have? How do you see that happening in your sector or your company? Are you trying to break some of the things just to let usability or the user experience become more maybe some convenient or easier, or maybe some nicer? How do you see that?
So I think obviously experience is a combination of things, right? You want to make it easier, you want to make it nicer, you want to make it pleasant. But I think for us recently, I would say the biggest thing that we have learned is that digital and automation is not equal to a better experience, per se. Some people still need the dialogue, right? Some people still need the human virtual touch. And so how do you put that into the experience in a way that is seamless across the journey, and that is sort of multi-platform / people? So in some way, how do you get your product to dialogue with your consumer? And that this dialogue could happen in different ways. It could happen through the words you're using or videos you're embedding within, or the ability for them to chat, or reaching that consumer at the right point, understanding the different patterns and behavior. So that dialogue to me is what has sort of, and that is not a financial services per se, it's not comparing banks to banks, it's just looking at the root of the problem and understanding what is the best way that we can help customers through this journey, in a way that they'll feel comfortable, they'll feel like they can trust us, and that ultimately it will lead us to solve real problems for that customer. So that lens is what's guiding us. And then recently, to your question, the biggest learning has been that sort of humanization, I guess, or,
Right.
build dialogue into a digital product.
We all feel that need, right? To have some more human touch or some kind of human touch with all the automation. Just remember the audience, you can pose your question anytime. You can be anonymous as well. So feel free to just send the question for this amazing panel. Matheus, getting into that, how do you feel that, point that Luana just brought in, the humanization of the process? I know all the process in Serasa is very technical as well, but how do you get the human touch? How do you think that you can operate in a way that the customer feels that is being somehow getting close to someone that is getting in touch humanly or person to person?
Yeah, I think sometimes that, for example, in our sector, sometimes we think, okay, we used to do this physically, so let's digitalize it. And then we try to digitalize the same process that you do in a physical experience. And I don't think this is the way we have to think. We have to think, how can we make this experience digital? Right. So sometimes we need to digitalize the process and we have to digitalize the experience. And of course, as I say, there's a lot of people who are doing this for the first time, so they will need help. So every digitalization, every process of evolution, it needs time. And I think, of course, the pandemic helped advance like 5 years, 10 years maybe, but people still need help, still need some contact, and still need some to feel that it is safe. It's very complex because sometimes you don't have to talk. We don't want to talk to anyone. You don't want to talk to anyone. I want to do this alone. But sometimes when I got lost, when I don't have control, I need someone to help. And how can I put my experience, someone to help in this right moment, and this will not break the experience at all. So there is no right answer. You need to look to your challenging, what problem I want to solve, and how can I make this experience digital, now the process digital, I think.
Right. Yeah, this is what overall we're trying to use, right? And then obviously one of the things that we always keep in mind is that what has been helping us to increase engagement, usability, retention. So in your industry, what could you say about that? I mean, what is the number one thing that you can say that is helping you to retain or keep this engagement with your clients? What will be the number one or number two tools or actions that you're using to make sure that you have that on your side?
Relevance. You need to be relevant. Your service needs to be relevant. You need to solve the problem. So if you have a service that nobody needed, you can have the best experience, you can have the best professionals, you can have the best marketing campaign, but if you're not relevant, if you're not solving any problems, so people will not engage with you. There's a lot of social media that we have saw in the past years that everybody starts to use it, and it's a boom, and suddenly nobody's using it because it's not relevant. You're not solving a problem. You're a trend.
Right.
So I think for me, it's relevant. You need to be relevant. You need to solve a problem, and you need to give a reason, and you have to have the triggers to consumers come back. Why they should come back with you? Do they need to come back with you? Why? Right. What you will present in the next experience? What's going to be different to them? Right. So, for example, in our case, we have a lot of service. So I can help you pay a debit. I can help you check your credit score. I can help you get a credit loan. I can help you get a card. I can help you pay a debit. I can help you protect your data. Because if I think in verticals, you're going to pay a debt like one time in your life, or you're going to need how many credit cards, like 1 or 2. So next time, what I'm going to present to you. So that's how we think, how can we develop features and elements that will give a new experience and make the consumers come back because we are relevant, not just because we have a experience.
Right, right. Luana, in your case, I'm not putting you on the spot, but what do you think brings the relevance or attracts your customer? Why they should stay in Creditas instead of going somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question for us. And I think I have to split that into product challenges or opportunities and category challenges, right? Remember, we do secured loans in Brazil. It is very different than the US. People are not really here very used to being indebted. They see it as a bad thing. They don't see it as leverage like you would in the US, where you mortgage your house and you use that money for you to go to school or open a business and just invest in yourself. Here in Brazil, people still treat it like something they feel a little more embarrassed. They're paying bills. So on a product level, yes, there's a lot we can do and we've been doing, and data has a lot to do with it because you study the patterns of consumers that come back, even if they didn't hire you at first, why are they coming back? And then consumers that are leaving you and testing, like I said, different approaches to make them stay. But we have a bigger challenge that is a category challenge. And that challenge is, how do you teach consumers that getting a good loan and a cheap loan, not any loan, but a good loan could actually, make you grow in different ways that you wouldn't have access. So we're now telling stories. We have customers that help us. They tell stories about how our loans changed their lives. We use those stories to inspire people and to try to show them that a good loan can get you very far. And we see stories, right, that are, I think stories is a very relevant thing. If you spread them across the company, also they become part of everybody. So, one thing is for us to believe we just give loans. The other thing is people here believe we are giving loans to people that are doing, IVF, and we have a Creditas baby out there. That is true. We are helping refugees from, another country who came from Brazil to bring his family. We're helping people expand family restaurants and, increase the income they have in their lives. So I think that it's a nuance, but if you're only looking at the transactional sort of root of the cause or the product, you may miss other challenges that you have the opportunity to work on and then help people in a different way.
I love that, Luana. I mean, you're bringing something that, digital marketing and all of us, we know that people are attracted by people, right? What you're doing is really humanization. We're trying to create stories that people can identify. It's not about the solution. It's not about the digital, device or everything that you're giving to them, but it's about, what is about them, right? What brings to them. And most likely it's going to be the experience that someone else had. So this is awesome, right? It's not about necessarily one specific technological thing, but it's how you help somebody to solve a problem or to change their lives. So this is really wonderful. Now, James, I know that you have a lot of experience, when we talk about engagement, usability, and retention. Before we go to the next question, we'd love to answer, how do you see that, happening in the industry? How do you think that industry is addressing, the issues of, get more retention, get customers to start using more devices or more solutions, and get them engaged, not to move to something else?
I think retention is one element, but trust that leads to adoption is the other element. And Luana was sort of alluding to the stigma of credit. We don't have the problem of the stigma of credit in the United States. We have a new business, which is, it's not new anymore. Hopefully that will be the next evolution for Brazil, which is renegotiating your debt. And there are now companies that specialize in helping you renegotiate your debt because you got into too much debt. So you have to be very, very careful. But the other element is financial inclusion. And how do you use digital technology to facilitate financial inclusion? And so the question earlier was raised about cash and ATM. So that has to be part of the ecosystem until such point as everybody's digitized. So it's access to technology, but it's also access to knowledge about how to use those technologies. And so here, we buy cars online now. We've got companies in the United States called Vroom and Carvana, and their whole thing is that they want to dehumanize the car sales experience, because in the US it's a bad consumer experience. Nobody likes to go to a dealership. They're always concerned about haggling and negotiations, and that they're going to be nickel and dime with all of these fees and whatever. They'd rather have an impersonal shopping experience where they can click, choose their options and whatever, and then get the net result. And then if they need to talk to somebody to obtain the line of credit or whatever, then those companies work with lenders and resell car loans packaged with the automobile that gets delivered to your home. So the pandemic has accelerated that, but I can see the pandemic accelerating a lot of similar things, including the way people shop for furniture, the way people shop for appliances is already evolving in that direction.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I think that this is a big change that is making us think, and see things differently.
Yeah. And you talked about Bitcoin earlier. Bitcoin is interesting, but what's more interesting is how do you leverage blockchain to secure
exactly. We're gonna
all
get into
those connecting points and make sure nothing is tampered with.
Yeah, and this is what got people, very nervous about making sure that they have confidential data. Let me address one quick question, although I don't want to talk too much about Cinq, because this is about the financial industry. But someone asking here, what tool does Cinq uses to convince a customer to invest in digital automation, and what do you use to demonstrate the ROI in their industry? So this is maybe one of the biggest differentials that Cinq has. We don't come to the customer with a one-off or one-size-fits-all, right? It's just an agile software development. So the proposition is to bring a team and together with the customer do an ideation, create a solution together, make sure that solution creates the responses that the customer is looking for. So it can be a variety of different of tools, from data analytics to artificial intelligence to simple tools that we can create, bringing examples not for the same industry but also from different industry. Again, diversity is the number one key elements for innovation, and this is what we try to do with our clients. So one last thing, I want to make sure that do we have any more questions? I think we don't have any questions from the audience. Just make sure that we give the time. All right, so let me see if we had any other questions here. Someone is saying perhaps several customers avoid using some new digital functionalities because of the security concerns. And we were talking about that. What are you doing to deal with that situation, right? And this is part of the blockchain. We're going to address that in a minute. And so many services option customer can use on some products of the company and ignore other features. How can we attract them to use more services? And this is part of the humanization eventually of really the experience that we were talking about, right? Making sure that we address that question, because I think it's very important. We all have been seeing recently attacks in cybersecurity and all of that. Security and privacy is one of the key elements in the financial industry, as is in others like healthcare and all of that. But in this industry, Luana, do you have any saying on how Creditas is trying to use the newest technologies to secure that cybersecurity process and make sure that the clients have their data and safe to live with you?
We have, and if I can talk about security, I think security is about priority, right? It's about resource allocation. Every company here has a limited amount of resource. And unless you're prioritizing the best people and the best resources to get that done, I've seen many companies in situations where you say it, but you're not putting the resources there. You're putting where it's going to generate you more short-term revenue. And that's an issue, right? So if you're talking about security and you really believe in it, and we do, for us, it's a really big thing. Resources and time and good people, they have to be put first. Right.
Matheus, I know not put in a spot because I know that Experian had that issue in Serasa, but obviously you have the golden pot. Everyone wants to break that information, right? So it's not about you have it or not. but you probably need to have a higher level of attention into security. How do you see that in Serasa?
Yeah, I think not only in Serasa, but for Experian as a company, security is a deal breaker. So if there is a data leak, people will lose trust on us. And I'm not the better person to talk about technicals of security, but as I say, it's a deal breakers, and we follow the most rigid protocols in the world to guarantee that your data is safe. But I think the challenge is in a digital contest is the middle point between security and a good experience. Because if you put a lot of steps to guarantee your security, you're not gonna have a good experience. But if you open too much, there's a lot of risk. So, for example, when when consumers are using your data in WhatsApp, for example, so there's two companies that you need to trust. That WhatsApp, it's saving the data of your customers, and then there's a lot of process that guarantees that there's no one that is trying to make a fraud. So for me, the challenge is to find this middle point, because people want good experience, but you need to take care of their data. So how is the middle point?
Yeah, that's again the sweet spot that we need to find. James, I'm gonna test your medium capacity here with one of the questions from the audience. You know, you're a consultant, so most likely you've been seeing that. On your point of view, what are the trends predicted for the financial industry in 2022? Right? What do you see happening next year?
I'm seeing, from the banking perspective, consolidation, but I'll leave that aside because it's not a technology issue, it's a financial issue. So I see more consolidation there. But what I see is I see opening up for more actors as architectures move towards more open platforms. But then, of course, more open platforms and open APIs raise the issue of security. So I think there's going to be, right now, based on what I see, a lot of focus on security first, simply because I think now people are really starting to understand security is a must-have, not a nice-to-have, shouldn't be an afterthought. And so as they're looking at what they have in place today and looking at how they need to either evolve it or replace it, security becomes really the core around which functionality and usability should be built, as opposed to a lot of applications today that we see where security is an afterthought. You put the RAN part around the functionality, but it's too weak. So that's why I'm looking at things such as blockchain, multi-factor authentication, biometrics. And if we're talking about mobile devices, also what new technologies the hardware providers will bring that would help facilitate and make security idiot resistant, because that's the number one obstacle ultimately that frustrates people. And that is the number one reason why people abandon a session when they enter in a mobile app or tablet or whatever. It's because of the security obstacle course that they abandon because they can't remember their password, or they don't have that other app, the Google Authenticator or this or that, and it becomes cumbersome. So I see that in 2022, the industry is going to be focusing on these issues, as well as optimizing their footprint in terms of banks, their distribution networks and consolidations.
Right. Thank you. Nice answer on that. We're getting into the end. Again, we have 6 minutes, but I just want to make sure people, anyone in the audience, if you want to send one last question, we still have a few minutes. Luana, I would like to know your opinion in one specific thing, and maybe the entire panelists here. How do maybe a little bit different? How do you become more agile in terms of a company? We look for new companies or smaller companies, fintechs, and all the differences in terms of the newest. They are more agile in terms of how they can evolve and get to the clients, and eventually more efficient. How do you get the challenge of that threat of getting some new players, threatening your customers and your business?
Good question. First, I want to say it's very easy for a new fintech to be agile and, have a mission because we don't have legacy systems and we don't have P&L pressures. Right. I love when I hear, a large startup coming and saying, we're solving problems and the big banks are the worst. I mean, are they? Because they have pressure that we don't have yet, right? So I think in that sense, we have the luxury of being able to look at the problem of the customer problem in absolute and not in a notion of an increment to what we already have, right? That's a luxury. And I would say, if all the banks could at least try that mindset and then you decide how you put that into action. But I think we just have the luxury to do so. And then in terms of how do we evolve and how do we make sure, competition is going to come in, we just need to stay focused, obviously continue innovating, but making sure you are true to your core. But at the same time, reading changes in the market and then pivoting your strategy. So that happened to us. We came in with a very big sort of selling point on having very cheap loans since they were secured. But as interest rates in Brazil started going down, I mean, they're starting to go back up again, but all the banks became more competitive. So you have to pivot and you have to believe this is going to be eventually a commodity. I hope so, right? Because then more people get access to cheaper credit. Then how do you solve the problem, which is what we're doing now through an ecosystem of solutions attached to that credit. So focus, but yet, keep an open mind and then pivot your strategy, be it macro or, micro, whenever you feel like you need to.
This is really market awareness. You're aware of what's going on, and also keeping in mind that you have a strong reference. So your reference is one of the, reputation is one of the big things to sustain that. Matheus, I'm not sure if you're in your side you have many of those, but do you see any kind of new entrants that might threaten, the what you do and you play in Experian or Serasa?
When we started in 2016, we were the first for everything. So to check your data, so if you have debits in Serasa or not, to check your credit score, to pay debits in a debit marketplace, to get credit in a credit marketplace. And what we saw in the last years that we have now competitors in verticals. So we teach people how to pay debits online, and then there's a lot of fintechs that only helps people pay their debits, like a Coursera or Kitja or other companies here. So yes, we have competitors in verticals, and as Luana say, they don't have now the pressure of the P&L because they're growing, and we are already heading this stage, and we have an ecosystem. So what makes us strong, make us weak. So because we have to look at the whole ecosystem, they're only focused on solve this problem, but we need to deal because there is a market for everyone. It's a big market, and you just need to focus in provide a good experience, and then not only focus on your competitor. Of course, you need to look at to see how they're innovating, how they are making their service, but I think you need to focus on their client needs, and then you will be good.
Yeah, I love the idea of healthy competition. I think there's space for everybody. And we need to rethink the way that we organize ourselves and we play in this market. This is just a different situation. I think maybe COVID, and we say COVID, but the pandemic and this isolation put everyone in a different state of mind to rethink the way that we play in this market, right? This is really amazing. And I think it's important. If we can really take advantage of that, I think we're gonna evolve to something way better than we used to. Listen, we're getting to top of the hour. First of all, I want to thank this panelists for this amazing conversation and for your time to be here. I'd like to thank all the audience also for being here as well. Remembering that this conversation was recorded, the webinar was recorded, and it will be available after this session through our YouTube channel. I'd like to thank everyone again. I wish you a great week ahead, and I'll talk to you soon. We have a lot to talk about, Bitcoins and digital currency and everything else. So a lot to come in the future. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.